Welcome, everybody, to this situational briefing from the MirYam Institute. I'm delighted to be joined by various members of our team, and everybody knows what this is about. So I'm going to dive right in by welcoming first John Spencer, in-house analyst here at the MirYam Institute and world-renowned expert on modern warfare and beyond. John, I want to start off by asking you, please, if you would just talk us through the casualties that America has thus far absorbed in this campaign against Iran.
Sure. Thanks, Benjamin. Thanks for having me. Honored to be a part of an esteemed panel. So as of this morning, as we're talking, there are 4 U.S. servicemen that have been killed in action. Our thoughts and prayers are with the units, the friends, and the family of those soldiers. There are also, from that event, which the Secretary of Defense Hegseth further gave details of this morning, was a tactical operations center that a barrage of missiles had been launched at U.S. soldiers, and one had gotten through. There were also 4 critically wounded in that, and that's why the number went from 3 now to 4, because one of the wounded succumbed to the injuries. And what the secretary said, I also believe, is that if anybody thinks that this shakes the resolve of the U.S. military or the U.S. population, they're wrong. It only hardens the resolve because they know what they're fighting for. And this war that the regime has waged against the United States for 47 years, it's clear in their minds, in my opinion, I don't speak for all servicemen, what they're fighting for. There was also 3 F-15s that were shot down by Kuwait. Luckily, all of the air crew of those, which was was a friendly fire, Kuwait defending against the Islamic regime's attacks, like they have 11 different countries, mistakenly shot down 3 aircraft. All of those crews have been reported as safely on the ground and doing well.
Well, we're obviously very sorry for the loss of those service personnel, and our prayers are with their families by whom they survived, and we're very grateful that the crew who were manning those aircraft that were shot down are alive and well. John, thank you very much for that. Now, I want to go back to a piece of analysis that you put up exclusively for the MirYam Institute about 2 weeks ago, I think, where it was entitled Iran's Moment, whether or not there was going to be a strike. It's still up on our website, incidentally, for those who want to go and read it. Brilliant analysis. What was it that you think that the Iranians so badly misjudged with regards to the American force buildup?
That it wasn't serious. I mean, like I say in the article, and as an analyst, you never know. War is uncertain by its very nature if it's going to hold up, and I think it did. That the United States and team, President Trump, Witkoff, everybody were negotiating in good faith. It wasn't as reported in maximalists, as they actually were bringing to the table everything from economic sanctions relief to uranium for actual civilian energy, not weapons grade. But it appeared that the administration, the Iranian Islamic regime, thought that it was the old state of affairs. It was the old game of they could negotiate and never, and even to this day, continue to say that they're not going to give up their nuclear program, the ballistic program, or their support to the proxies. I don't know what the exact moment. Of course, there was intelligence that drove the opening of this operation. I'm sure Yaakov or others will talk about intelligence drives all operations. So clearly the negotiation, and we saw this multiple rounds in Geneva and behind backdoor negotiations like they happen, and there was no movement of the Islamic regime and not taking that buildup seriously. That it was we don't do buildups like that just for negotiation sense. I mean, the greatest way to deter war is to get prepared for war. Trump doctrine includes this real credible, like we will negotiate to a point. And this is why red lines are so important.
Yeah, now turning to something else that the secretary said, and Yaakov Lappin, another analyst here at the MirYam Institute, I want to bring you in on this. Secretary of War Hegseth expressed that capable allies are what the Americans want, and he was referring, of course, to Israel's role in these strikes. Tell us about Israel's involvement to this point since the launch of this campaign against the regime chiefs over there in Iran.
So I think, we're definitely looking at history here, Benjamin, both from a strategic and a military operational perspective. This is the first war that Israel has actually fought together with an allied military since, I guess, 1956, since the Suez Canal, when there was a joint Israeli-British-French operation. Since then, the IDF has fought all of its wars on its own. This is the first full-fledged ally that's taking part in a war. And I think that speaks to the level of trust here between the various operators in the air, on the ground, the intelligence. It's unprecedented, and that's what Israeli defense officials are saying, that this is unprecedented. Now, look, in terms of the trigger for Israel, the trigger for Israel for its attack is the buildup of Iran's missile program. What they were talking about, the defense officials, is that back in June, the Iranian arsenal was about 3,000 missiles. At the end of the June war, Operation Rising Lion, it came back down to about 1,500. And then the Iranians accelerated their missile program because it's the only real component of their three-stage strategy of destroying the state of Israel. They had the missiles, they had the nuclear program, and the proxies. And just a quick recap, the proxy strategy largely collapsed because Israel, one by one, dismantled most of the capabilities, Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and then the Assad regime collapsed, a very important land bridge for supplying Hezbollah. And then they went after the head of the snake in Tehran during the operation. And the only thing that worked out of these three pillars of the strategy to destroy Israel is the missiles. And so what happened after that war is that the IRGC basically fast-tracked the production of missiles, and they had reached the number of 2,500. That number was actually declassified by the IDF in response to my inquiry of the IDF spokesperson a couple of days ago. I asked them what the precise number where the arsenal stood, 2,500. Now that is too many because the Iranian game plan here is to be able to saturate our multi-layered air defense. We know what these missiles can do. Israel has the best air defense system in the world, but if they had reached their goal, which was to build 8,000 missiles by the year 2027, next year, that would be too much for any air defense system. And so that was the main trigger for Israel to get involved in the war as far as the IDF was concerned. And of course, what we saw is from the very beginning, what we saw is the efforts directed at two main, I would call it nodes. One is the leadership, really just phenomenal strikes. Khamenei underground in his bunker and the leadership. And we actually saw two strikes in 60 seconds in two different locations in Tehran, targeting simultaneous leaders, political and military and terrorist leaders in Iran, and eliminating 40 of them in 60 seconds. I don't recall anything like this. And then a series of strikes to establish air. I wouldn't call it superiority at that stage. It was more like dominance because it was a gradual repression of the Iranian air defense, the surface-to-air missile capabilities. And then once that became basically air superiority for the Israeli Air Force, we saw the big hunt underway for the missile launchers. And as of yesterday, about 200 of these missile launchers have been destroyed. That's about 50% of the Iranian ballistic missile firing capability, and hundreds of missiles themselves. But the priority is taking out the launchers that are loaded with the missiles. That's the top priority right now for the Israeli Air Force. And we're seeing, just constant streams of jet formations heading east, landing, refueling, working with the United States, being refueled by the United States, as well as by Israeli refuelers. Really, history is being made here. The Pentagon talked about striking over 1,000 targets. We see a clear division of labor here. Israel is going after largely missile-related targets, the missile program, the leadership, and the United States is going after the IRGC, command and control, naval threats. It's a vast operation, and it's unprecedented. And I think we're going to be learning about it for years to come.
Thank you, Yaakov. I want to move now to Micah Jones, and I've brought Micah into this program because he's a long-time adjunct at the MirYam Institute. He's also an alumnus of the MirYam Institute's ISAP tour that brings future leaders here to Israel for a strategy and policy tour of the country. And he is a veteran of service. He was an intelligence officer attached to the 82nd Airborne Division with a deployment to Afghanistan, among his other highlights from his military career. And now he's running for office. He's actually running for the 6th District in Massachusetts as a Republican. And Micah, I wanted you, as somebody who is out front and center and able to speak to this, I want you to put the lie, if you would, to the idea that's coming from some within the Republican base, I would say some within the MAGA base to be more precise, that the United States doesn't really need to be meddling in Iran in any way, shape, or form. Talk about why it is that America is right to be taking the fight to this regime over there in Iran.
Thank you, Benjamin, and great to be on the podcast with my co-panelists and Yaakov, John, and Ruth. Really appreciate the opportunity. As you highlight, Benjamin, this is a regime that's been in power for 47 years, and it has been 47 years of chaos within the region and actively seeking to undermine not only the United States, but allies like Israel, and then also neighbor states, as we've seen with the Gulf Arab states. And so I'd like to just kind of walk the viewers and the listeners back through this timeline, because I think people forget just how much damage this regime has done, and in particular to American forces directly. So beginning, I think people forget that the Marine barracks bombing in Lebanon back in October of 1983, 241 American service members were killed by Iranian proxy Hezbollah. 220 of those service members were U.S. Marines. And before Global War on Terror, that was one of the most devastating attacks on U.S. service personnel since World War II. And so that's something that is still in recent memory, and hundreds of American service members were killed. Shortly after, you had the kidnapping of the then CIA station chief in Lebanon, William Buckley, who was kidnapped, tortured, and ended up dying in captivity in 1985. And then continuing to the global war on terror, and specifically in Iraq, although as I'll highlight in a second, also in Afghanistan, you had over 600 American service members who were directly killed by Iranian materiel, whether it was weapons or training to proxies. And it was something that was absolutely horrific. But as there have been reports, it was hundreds of American service members. And I saw that firsthand in Afghanistan when I deployed 2014 to 2015. At that time, the Iranians were, again, providing training, weapons, material to the Taliban, as well as the Haqqani network. And I personally knew soldiers who had been killed because of those munitions. And so to me, this is something where the tentacles of the Iranian regime have been vast, and they've been absolutely trying to undermine American interests and America's allies' interests throughout the region.
So before I come to our next panelist, Micah, I just want to stay with you for a moment. There is already an effort underfoot. It's underfoot in the international media. I've done several media hits for the international channels in Britain, in the United States, since this war began. I remind everybody it only began on Saturday morning, and we are now recording this show on Monday, March the 2nd. And there are many, many assertions that suggest that there's no strategy here. It doesn't take them long to say everything's lost and there's no pathway and there's no oversight, nobody knows where they're going. But I wonder if you, on the political level, would be able to say how important that is when the president makes his calculation as to how long he's going to stay assigned to this mission. How much do you think he's looking at the political calculus, and what would you want to see from the President of the United States, given the complexity of this campaign?
No, thank you, Benjamin. I think you captured it exactly at the beginning, that none of us or I certainly am not privy to the classified, intelligence that the American military had in regards to deciding that this was the moment to execute the strike, and drinking from the fire hose like everybody else with the constant updates on X and the news sources. So I think what the administration could do best is maintain constant communication to both the American people and also American service members to continue focusing on that there are clear objectives, such as the destruction of the ballistic missile program, as Yaakov touched on at the beginning. I don't think listeners in the West realize how devastating that is. And I know that you're in Israel right now, and just absolutely tragic to see how those missiles have gotten through some of the Israeli defenses, but those are terribly capable and devastating missiles. And then also the complete destruction of the nuclear program is a serious objective. And as we saw last summer after Operation Midnight Hammer, something that the Iranians continue to try to seek in obtaining a nuclear weapon, despite negotiations to try to get them to find an off-ramp, as well as the overall Iranian Navy and IRGC capabilities. So I think if maintaining constant communication for both the troops and the public in regards to those objectives and other ones that materialize over the next few days, I think is important from the administration, just to understand and foster continued support for the war effort. Something I want to say too, though, and I know there's a lot of conversation here in the U.S., but just to inform the listeners, the United States does have the 1973 War Powers Resolution, and there's a lot of talk about that right now in American media. To my understanding, the administration has fulfilled the first requirement, which is letting Congress know at least within 48 hours after a strike has occurred. And my understanding as well is that the Gang of Eight, the colloquial name for the high-ranking members of the Intelligence Committee for both Democrats and Republicans, were informed before the strike as well. And so now it's up to Congress to determine and reassert its constitutional authority to determine whether or not there should be military authorization after 60 days. If they determine that there should not, then there's the administration can continue the fight for 60 days, and there's up to a 30-day off ramp. But for the listeners, I remind folks that most U.S. actions after the fact have not actually had that authorized use of military force, including the 2011 campaign in Libya that went on for 7 months. So I think it's a fluid motion and dynamic, and again, constant communication.
Thank you, Micah. Now I'm delighted to ask you, Ruth Wasserman-Lande, to weigh in. Ruth, for those of you who may not be familiar with her, is a prolific commentator in the international media. She's also a prolific commentator here in Israel. She's a former deputy ambassador to Egypt, former member of Knesset, and somebody who really brings an exceptional degree of expertise to her commentary. Ruth, I want to ask you, there's a much expected set of media coverage that is focused on Iran, Israel, Iran, the US, Iran, the US, but far less spoken about is actually what's going on with the other countries in the region. And we've seen that the Iranians have responded to this by hitting Qatar, Kuwait, the UAE, Bahrain, Israel, Jordan, Saudi Arabia. Are we looking at a regime that is more than ready to ride off into a suicidal outcome? Are they hoping to draw others into the fray? What do you think is the goal here, and what do you think is going to be the likely response and reaction of the aforementioned countries, albeit in most cases, not all by any means, but in most cases, they've been targeting US assets in those areas?
So first of all, it's a pleasure for me as well to be on board with such prestigious commentators. Thank you. Yes, indeed, this is the whole idea, or the whole, I would say, angle that the international mainstream media would like us to focus on is Israel, Iran, Israel, and at a second stage, the United States as well. But of course, that's not the whole picture. It hasn't been like that for 47 years. In fact, I argue that the Islamic Republic of Iran has been preparing systematically and very, very patiently over the last decade sleeper cells in Europe, in Canada, in the United States of America, very possibly also in Israel, and certainly in other countries in the region. And the more the regime will feel its back up against the wall and deteriorating in military might, the more it will be reckless in tapping in onto those sleeper cells. And what do I mean by them? Literally, people who are loyal to the Islamic Republic of Iran in all the countries you had mentioned, but also in the West, in Europe, in various countries throughout Europe, and in the United States of America, not to mention Canada and Australia. And this is the dangerous thing, because this is unexpected. And the I would say the mechanism of support or the defenses against that are relatively weak, particularly in democracy. So this is something to flag and to really look into and take refuge from in a very serious and meticulous manner by intelligence services and defense services throughout the world. That's number one. Number two, what I foresee, not in the day after, but already with the weakening, and it will be gradually more and more thereof, of the Islamic Republic of Iran, is an attempt to infiltrate and to take over, not physically, but very much sabotage way by Qatar and Turkey into the Islamic Republic of Iran. Why am I mentioning that in response to your particular question, because whereas it seems as if there is a kind of a unity amidst Gulf countries, of course there isn't. Those who understand know that there is not a homogeneous kind of response and clarity amongst those countries, but rather a fear of Qatar and its infiltration, and of Turkey as well, even though there's a seeming rapprochement. And this is exactly what we should be flagging and seeing right now in terms of defenses against a possible infiltration, not only into the Islamic Republic of Iran, but into other countries in the region, while everybody is focusing particularly on Israel, Iran, Israel, United States of America, and so on. Having said all of that, the attack of the Islamic Republic of Iran on some of the countries you had mentioned is absolutely unprecedented, absolutely insane. It is more than all of the attacks of Israel in defense mode against any Arab country from the beginning of its existence in 1948. It is absolutely insane. And this is something to look at in terms of creating the foundations of future coalitions. And we see those coalitions in the making right now. We see potential Saudi Arabian, Turkish, Pakistani, Qatari coalitions, and suddenly we see a hitting of the Islamic Republic of Iran, Saudi Arabia itself. So we need to understand that this has happened. We need to leverage that in order to gain the support of Saudi Arabia in the right coalition, not Israel, not the United States, but all of those who are on the other side of that coalition.
Thank you, John. I want to come back to you about something that's of interest to me. I don't want to put you in a corner about the politics of this. That's what Micah's here for. But I do want to speak to you about something that I found interesting in the messaging of President Trump and also Prime Minister Netanyahu. There's this enormous campaign. It's in its infancy. There's a declaration that it's going to continue for as long as is necessary. Secretary of War has said that. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs flanking him as he did so. But there is an out that is put there, which is to repeatedly say that if Iran is to be free, the Iranian people need to rise up and push this over the line. Now, I'm dubious about that. Perhaps in a later question, I'll express why and maybe pitch that to somebody. But I think that it's very interesting. We've seen the sinking of messaging from President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu about the idea that this is something that brings freedom for the Iranian people. I don't believe that's arbitrary, unanimous messaging at all. But it also is somewhat of an absolving of responsibility, because it says, listen, we can do the heavy lift militarily, but if a real change is going to come about, don't look at us. We're not saying we can do that. We need the people to do it. And they're actually speaking directly to the people as they propagate this message. I'd like to hear from you the examples of regime changes and sea changes within societies that have come about as a consequence of an aerial campaign, and whether or not you see reasons for optimism that the Iranian people are going to carry this to the end that President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu are evoking in their messaging.
Well, thank you, Benjamin, for not pushing me into a corner. Although we can both be opinionated, pun intended. Yeah, all war is politics by other means. We cannot discount the political nature, both domestically in the United States and geopolitically, about this operation, right? So declarations of war are specific. They have definitions constitutionally, Article 2, War Powers Resolution Act. It's very important. And actually, I was pushing back this morning on, again, within that political framework on what are the goals, right? If anybody doubts it, the president has now three times. He was just on the air right before we just talked, saying this is the goals of Operation Epic Fury for us. And that he always ends with speaking to the Iranian people, but very specific. This is not a regime change war for the United States. It's a very targeted. These are the objectives. The president has now said it three times. The Secretary of Defense, and I don't know why the media can't quote him accurately. But your question was more specific to history of war and whether air power alone. I'm actually that is a great question. There's only two modern examples, truly, where air power forced that regime change, basically. That's in the 1990s Serbia operation against Milosevic and the Libya operation. Each one of them have their own context and nuances of how that happened. I was a part of a regime change operation invading in Iraq and what it took. I just had on my podcast the Battle of Baghdad, which was that ground power cognitive win, and then the military falls away. Each country, and that's why we study military history and with depth and context. In this case, though, there are so many indicators, and I know Ruth and others could point them out otherwise, of the population of this 92 million country with rich history, diverse ethnicity, even in the different factions, versus the Islamic regime. What we saw during the protests in January, which is a part of this calculation, of course, is that that rising is a possibility. Of course, the brutality of the regime, not just this in the last protest, was over 32,000, according to some estimates, killed, tens of thousands arrested. But going even back further, you have to have the ability to take that power. And that's why I really like the president's speech on the opening hours of when this started, when he laid it out. It was very prescriptive. Here are the specified tasks of the nuclear program, the missile program, and the Navy, again, because their threats of closing the Straits of Hormuz, where 20% of the world's crude oil comes through. And then he went on to, of course, appealing to even the military in Iran, because that is historic within Iran as well. If you look back to 1979 revolution and who is joining in, that is always a part of the defector part and lessons learned from us. But speaking directly to the people, that this is your once in a lifetime opportunity and a generation, basically a generational opportunity for them. And it's very important for us to say that's not what our goal is. Of course, the world will be a better place. The Middle East will be a better place. But understanding militaries, what it would take to do that, hundreds of thousands of troops necessary to actually seize the power, what we call the center of gravity. I've seen what that looks like. And then the regime change afterwards. It's messy business. That is the preferred course of action, of course, and the unified message of all parties. That's a byproduct of the very specific military goals, which some reason, all the detractors in the political nature want to make this about politics, and it's not.
So, Ruth, I'm going to try and set the cat among the pigeons here a little bit. I have a very dim view of this notion of regime change being in and of itself a wonderful outcome, and I take a very dim view of the idea that we necessarily see a better reality come to pass in the shadow of regime change. And two of the examples, one of those was mentioned by John, Libya, certainly regime change. The people did rise up, but it hasn't exactly worked out to our ultimate benefit, I wouldn't say. It's an extremely complex place, split into two, very problematic. And in addition to what we saw in Libya, I also saw that there was a lot of presumption about the idea that the Egyptians would take their country by the scruff of the neck during what was called the Arab Spring, and that the Egyptian populace wanted democracy, as then President Obama believed was the case. I would say wrongly so. And we saw the Muslim Brotherhood come to power, which was only stopped really by way of a military coup by the incumbent, now President Sisi. So are we to really believe that the Iranian people are uniquely different? I know that we hear that they're different. I know that we regularly tell them that they're a wonderful society and they're supremely educated, and people can argue the toss about that, and that's absolutely fine. But I hear this being said about every people who are living under every tyrant, and I see very few of them freeing themselves from those chains and then falling into a fashion and building up a country that meets with our goals and our interests and even the interests of the United States of America. In fact, they oftentimes seem fundamentally opposed to that. What do you think would happen were the Iranian people to rise up, not in terms of them taking hold of their country, but in terms of their attitude towards Israel and the United States thereafter?
I think we need to understand that Iran is fundamentally different from other Arab states. It is not an Arab country. This is a very important thing to understand. It is not an Arab country. It is a different culture, a different society, a different mentality. And this is the key to understand Iran. That's first and foremost. So the presumptions that you had mentioned and are very correct, they're very legitimate about Libya, certainly about Egypt and potential chaos that could have taken place there, and so on and so forth, not to mention what's going on in Syria right now and other places, are absolutely legitimate. And yes, there is a huge potential of chaos and vacuums, and that's exactly what I was speaking about before, that Turkey and Qatar are sitting on the fence awaiting their sabotage. Full stop. By the way, very happily aided by Russia and China that seemingly support the current Islamic regime. But what they truly support is the undermining of the American hegemony and having yet another foothold in the region in the form of what is now the Islamic Republic of Iran is fantastic. So it doesn't matter if they do win or don't win. China and Russia would want a piece of that. There is a huge danger of that. And therefore, whatever the American administration may say or not, and I'm not a political analyst, certainly not on issues pertaining to the American arena, but whatever they may say publicly or not, if the American administration will not play a role in creating the, let's say, the precise conditions, or not precise, let's take a word precise out of this equation, because there's nothing precise about it. It is what it is, instability. But to take that instability and create the conditions in which a positive change can take place with the Baluchis, with the Azeris, with Arabistan, the Sunnis in the south of Iran, with the interests of Pakistan, which are very complex vis-a-vis the specific area, and India, which is divided. It is cooperating with the Islamic Republic of Iran right now and prior to this war, and yet is in a coalition with Israel and the United States. Things are not black and white. And hence, whilst the United States of America is not openly, actively, publicly involved in creating certain circumstances for good governance, not democracy, not optimal, utopian, some kind of a reality, but good conditions to prevent Russia, China, Turkey, and Qatar from actually doing what they want in that arena, which they're ready to do. They are ready with the plans. They need to play an active role, not publicly, not in a very profound manner, but to protect American citizens, to protect exactly what they are set out. They are setting out to protect in what they are doing in Iran right now.
So, Yaakov, I want to come back to the military aspect of this. During the 12-day war, there were some 600 missiles that were launched toward Israel by the Iranians. And they caused some damage, but nothing compared to what the Iranians obviously would have hoped to have caused. We're seeing far less actually come in this time. What's the difference between Israel and the US's campaign? that is impeding the Iranians' abilities beyond the taking out of Khamenei. What do you think militarily is the distinction here that's playing to our advantage?
First of all, I think that first strike, what they call the Genesis stage in the Israeli Air Force, when you had 200 Israeli fighter jets, which, by the way, is the largest flyover in Israeli Air Force history. Never before have 200 jets set out in a massive formation towards an adversary's territory until last Saturday. The fact that they were able to strike simultaneously so many commanders who were tied in to the coordination of the Iranian missile array, I think that caused a significant disruption. And then that was followed up very quickly by a sequence of strikes on Iranian missile bases, underground bases, some of them very well known to those who follow this stuff, like the Imam Ali base, and the hunt that also ensued for the mobile missile launchers. These are the truck-based missile launchers that Iran has scattered and hidden all over the country. The fact that this happened all so quickly, one after the other, by virtue of planning, and the fact that Israel was not alone in this, that the American Air Force was very heavily involved right from the beginning, I think that is what basically shocked the Iranian system, and it was unable to reproduce the same frequency, I should say the same volume of volleys that it had produced back in June of 2025. To make up for that, they increased the frequency. So what we had is far smaller volleys, but much more frequent and successive, and especially in the first sort of 24 hours, we were basically in the shelter here and in the safe rooms constantly, continuously, every few hours, another alert. And it's a pace that we didn't even see in June. But very quickly, it became clear to us that these volleys are smaller. And yet, despite all of that, we had the tragedy yesterday in Bet Shemesh, just outside Jerusalem, where a massive Iranian ballistic missile with hundreds of kilograms warhead slammed into a residential building. And actually, we heard from a defense official just this morning that, and this is not a surprise to anybody who knows what Iran is, that Iran is very deliberately attempting to target residential areas in order to terrorize and demoralize the Israeli population. So they're not only going after strategic and military sites, which they're also trying to hit, of course, but they're also deliberately targeting civilians with these missiles. And, I think we really have to understand that as far as Israel is concerned, the Iranian ballistic missile program is basically a death machine. That is what this program is. It is designed to rain down death and destruction on the state of Israel. And therefore, I've heard time and again, really since last year, that even if you separate the Iranian missile program from the nuclear program, put the nuclear program aside because it has not recovered very well from June, unlike the missile program. But just look at the missiles themselves. They represent their own existential danger to Israel, separately from the nuclear. So even though in the future they could carry, nuclear warheads if Iran breaks through, even just with these conventional warheads, with enough of them raining down on our cities, doesn't matter how good our defenses are, nobody can stand up to 8,000 missiles. So that is the threat at hand, and that is why it was critical for Israel to make its move now. And it's interesting when you talk about the regime change angle of this, when you talk to the defense officials and the people who, are privy to the planning, they are stressing first and foremost, we had to remove the missile threat. And one of the main lessons of October 7th, of course, is when a threat forms, there is no more waiting, there's no more containing, no more attempt to deter. A threat is formed, it's being made by a jihadist adversary, it has to be removed. There can't be any more waiting. Very similar to the way, I guess, the medical establishment would look at a tumor. Apologies for the comparison, but I think it's really the most apt one, and that is the transformation that we have seen in the Israeli defense establishment. And this is the main thing that we're hearing. Everything beyond that is a sort of nice to have. But first of all, this missile program had to be checked.
So just before I bring in John, I want to talk a little bit about the division of labor here between the Americans and the Israelis. I want to come back to you, Micah. There is a running conversation in the United States about the idea that American blood is spilled in the pursuit of Israeli interests. Now, this is a canard, it's a slander. So I want to focus, despite that canard, on American interests. What would be the American interests that you would like to see, that you insist even on being realized and pursued during the course of a campaign such as this, given that there are already casualties, given that President Trump did something that was a little bit odd for the president? He actually forewarned about the possibility of America taking casualties. This is somebody who very much likes to proclaim that military missions have been undertaken flawlessly and without any casualties, as we well understand. What would you want to see achieved here, no matter what? I'll give you an example of something. There are 450 kilos of 60% enriched uranium that they believe is somewhere in the area of Isfahan. This is obviously something that would be used in pursuit of nuclear weapons capabilities. There was also proclamation by the same President Trump, of course, that that nuclear program had been obliterated. That was the word of choice. There's reason to think that that is not the case. So I'd like you to speak to an American listener about what American essential outcomes are from this operation, with or without the threats that Yaakov just described stand in front of Israel.
Yes, thank you, Benjamin. I think the main focus of this needs to be the degradation, the degrading of the regime, whether or not it is new leadership installed, but the making sure that the Iranian regime has no further way to enact its terrorist goals, and specifically making sure that the ballistic missile program, which is, yes, a clear and dire threat to the state of Israel, but it's also able to reach every single U.S. base in the region. And there are thousands of American troops deployed throughout the Middle East right now, and all of those Americans are under threat of that Iranian ballistic missile program. Same with degrading the ability for the IRGC to affect and provide materiel to proxies throughout the region, as we saw earlier, or at the end of last year, 2025, with the Houthis and Hamas and Hezbollah, which, again, as I said earlier, Hezbollah in particular, having killed the Americans in 1983, but making sure that no terrorist proxies have the ability to cause further damage to U.S. troops and U.S. civilians in the area. And then also making sure that the nuclear program is truly degraded to a point that they're not able to achieve a nuclear weapon ever, ideally, but certainly not for decades, if that is what ends up being. Because I think if this regime and jihadist forces have a nuclear weapon, that puts the American homeland at risk. It puts American forces abroad at risk. And this is very much in America's interests. And I think that's something I always come back to, and to kind of piggyback on what Yaakov said, is that you have to believe when your enemy wants to hurt you. And the Iranian regime always calls Israel the little Satan, but they call America the big Satan. And they very much want to undermine and destroy the United States. And that is something that me as an American who has served overseas, feels very strongly encountering, because with the Iranian regime destroyed, it will make the Middle East as a whole a much safer place. And I think it will really allow for continued peace within the region, within the Gulf states, with Israel, with Lebanon. And I think we really could see a renaissance in the area.
So, John, with everything that's gone on thus far, can you just talk us through the division of labor between these two allies, between the Americans and the Israelis, in terms of what they've been targeting, where the intelligence is coming from, and what might be the target banks in the near future?
Sure. And while Israel actually has been, the IDF and the leadership communicating often, and CENTCOM was a little slow, but then has now started to message those specifics. It's not my opinion. The synchronization, though, especially even of the opening of this operation for both countries, that synchronization was, of course, they've stated already months in planning, but I think that's years in cooperation to be able to do that, where you have, like Yaakov said, the greatest demonstration of the Israeli Air Force, but the timing of U.S. missiles and bombs landing at the same time, the cyber operations that are defeating air defense capabilities, that level of synchronization, of course, a lot was learned in April of 2024, October of 2024, and of course during the 12-day war. That I think is hard for people to understand. Now, in the opening moments, clearly, and even the Secretary of Defense, when asked this morning about Israel killing the Ayatollah, said they did a great job. And as in that targeting of the leadership, although there seemed to be great cooperation between the CIA and Mossad in tracking of the Ayatollah and making sure that that meeting was and then the amount of ordnance used to make sure you get to that meeting. But your broader question, it seems, although it can change, I'm sure, day to day, Israel using their precision to target leadership and other locations, although we've seen almost every headquarters being blown up, the IRGC headquarters, the Missile Command headquarters, a lot of the headquarters, with the United States targeting a lot of that military infrastructure, like the launchers, to include sites that were hit in the past. And the combination of these two powers, of course, you have the division, of course, of defensive capabilities. Israel, with its hierarchy, as you know more than I do, of the Iron Dome, David's Sling, Arrow 2 through possibly 4, hopefully soon. The defensive capabilities, which requires not just the ground platforms, but the air platforms, and this joint command center that clearly is happening between Israel and the United States to execute this. But that target bank increasing, President Trump was just on this morning stating that it's actually going better than planned, as in elimination of this target blank for our objectives, and of course with Israel's objectives. We've sunk 9 Iranian ships, and ensuring that they don't do what is threatened, which is to basically mine and close significantly for a long term the Straits of Hormuz. But that difference between Israel targeting leadership and offensive capabilities, United States targeting that infrastructure, and of course there's always rapid changes between this. Even the Joint Chief of Staff said they're moving more assets into theater to increase. Of course, you'll never say for operational security how much. Increase the defensive capabilities. I think that's the reason, not to speculate, but they're still moving. This is a rapidly moving operation, but the president's saying, and I'm sure he's been given the detailed briefings, we're actually ahead of where they thought. And that's really, when you combine the powers of Israel and the United States, this is what, as a military recorder, really a researcher, I have a lot of work to do. The 12-day war was already a change in the character of warfare and what can possibly be done in war. Now this one, it should put the fear of God in at least the Islamic regime, as we talked about, the 30 senior leaders during the 12-day war, the 40 at this point. Nobody knows who the leadership is, and if you elect a new general to be in charge, Israel's intelligence and the United States' power target that individual, but there seems to be a division for sure.
So I know that we're coming to the end of our time here, and it's been a great conversation. I'm going to go around the horn once with a short quick-fire question that I want a short quick-fire answer to. I'm going to begin with Micah Jones. Micah, will the Iranian people carry this over the line? And if they do, will it be to the benefit? Will it be to the building of a more positive relationship between Iran, the United States, and Israel? A short answer.
I hope so, and yes.
Okay, John Spencer, same question.
Sure hope so, and yes.
Yaakov Lappin.
I'm sorry, there was a little bit of interruption. Were you asking whether the Iranian people are going to rise up?
I think my question is, will the Iranian people carry this over the line as they're being beseeched to do? And will that be to the benefit of an American-Iranian-Israeli relationship?
Okay, so just give me 2 sentences for this one, maybe a little bit more, because I do have something to say, okay?
Okay.
I'm skeptical that they can do it now. I really would love to be proven wrong. I'm very skeptical, and I'll tell you why. Because the last time they tried, which was only a month and a half ago, January 8th, 9th, 35,000 of them were mowed down, and not only with Kalashnikovs, with heavy machine guns. Nobody can defend themselves against a heavy machine gun. They are unarmed. They are unorganized. They're incredibly brave. They are different in the Middle East. This Iranian people who despise their regime and who actually love the United States, the West, the Jewish people in Israel, and you can see it when you meet them in the diaspora and in the West. When you meet these people, you know that they're different, and they're out there, by the way, celebrating Khamenei's elimination together, hand in hand, with Jews and Israelis in the streets of cities like London. It's absolutely remarkable, and you don't see that with other populations. So they are different. I don't think they have the capability to do it right now. They need to be armed, and I think that Israel and the United States need to have a hand in that. And another issue, when we're looking at places like Libya, you had sort of tens of thousands, and maybe John can correct me, 100,000 armed militia men who brought down, they were the completing ground maneuver after the air power. I don't see anything like that right now in Iran, and therefore I'm concerned about the timeline. I'm concerned that this regime will survive this war, and if it does, we're going to have to come back and strike it again. So that's my take on that.
Thank you very much. I do appreciate your question, but your answer, Yaakov, very much. But I'm going to appeal to Ruth not to follow your example, and there's a short answer. Ruth.
Well, I'm different in the view
same
here in
question.
general, given the fact that I'm the only woman. So I'll be different with your permission. They won't rise up now because we're not done yet. There's still tons to do. IRCG, Basij, and other hooligans that are actually literally mowing down civilian population are hooligans. They are still in power. And as long as they're still in power, there's still lots to do. Western countries need also help. For example, outlaw the IRCG. This is something that is obvious unless you want Russia, China, and Islamic regimes to run your country. If you do, continue as you do. If you do not, take very precise steps to outlaw not only Muslim Brotherhood on the Sunni side, but IRCG. One country that has not done that yet is the UK. This is the time. Why am I saying that? Because as long as they have these safe havens, then the Iranian people will have a more difficult time. Here I end my answer. I do believe in the Iranian people. I do. They will be successful.
Benjamin, I'm sorry, I have to add one last thing. I'm sorry, this is a matter that's close to my heart.
Very swiftly, Yaakov.
I do believe that this regime is destined to fall. I think it's a matter of time. I just don't think it's going to happen tomorrow. And I think that weapons have got to be put in the hands of the Iranian people if we're going to be realistic about toppling the regime. That's it. Thanks.
Okay, so my answer to this, seeing as you're all asking me, is that I'm deeply skeptical about the ability of the Iranian people to rise up. And I am deeply skeptical, despite the fact that Iran, of course, is not an Arab state, despite being here in the Middle East, something that most people don't seem to understand. I am deeply skeptical that a free Iranian people will turn out to be tremendously sympathetic towards Israel and the United States, but I'd be very, very happy to be proven wrong, if I am indeed proven wrong. I think that there is an overarching readiness in the West to believe that the more cosmopolitan community there in Tehran is representative of the broader Iranian populace. It is not. And I actually take issue with the idea that if we look at the diaspora of the Iranian people arrayed around the earth as they are, they're very successful, they're very well educated. They also seem to have a deep, deep antipathy in many a meeting that I've had with them towards Israel at the very least. So let's wait and see. It's an interesting time. I want to conclude it by thanking all of you. Thank you so very much for being here on this situational briefing. And a reminder to our listeners, we've been joined here today by Micah Jones, congressional candidate for the 6th District in Massachusetts, military veteran and ISAP alumnus, John Spencer, in-house analyst at the MirYam Institute and expert on warfare of the urban nature and it seems every other kind. John, I'll be waiting for your WhatsApp letting me know that you've jumped over to Iran to go and analyze what's going on the ground over there. I could take a bet on how quickly that will happen. Yaakov Lappin, another expert here at the MirYam Institute, and of course, Ruth Wasserman-Lande former Deputy Ambassador to Egypt, former Member of Knesset. And just one more thing before I let you all go. There are 2 books that are about to go on sale. John, what's the name of your book?
20 Times I Almost Died, Life Lessons from the Age of Survival.
Right. Go out and get that. Yaakov Lappin, what's the name of your book?
Blue Team Dynamics, 3 leadership lessons inspired by IDF sources for business and life.
Wonderful. With that, we come to a conclusion. Thank you very much indeed, and I look forward to all of you joining us again in the near future. Take care. Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us for this situational briefing by the MirYam Institute, recorded from here in my safe room at home here in central Israel as a result of the ongoing war between the United States and Israel and Iran. I hope that you've enjoyed this conversation, and if you have, please be sure to hit the subscribe button and the like button, because doing so makes sure that you are the first to receive all of our cutting edge analysis and exclusive footage. And also remember, I very much want to hear what's on your mind. So please leave a comment in the comment section, and I'll do my very best to get back to you. And I look forward to seeing you next time.